But the news of the day is in the coaching landscape. It started with Matt Rule, who was 11-3 this year at Baylor, a remarkable turnaround. He did play at Penn State under Joe Paterno. He coached for a season with the New York Giants. He had a dramatic turnaround of Temple's program before the dramatic turnaround of Baylor's program. So in terms of turning things around, he's terrific. Could have stayed at Baylor for a lifetime deal, but not being a Texan, Baylor not being the premier job in the league, even though it's a private school and you can make gobs and gobs of money, it does make some sense that it wasn't his last stop. Apparently, the Giants had him number one on the list. So did the Browns. Of course, he wouldn't interview with the Browns, and the Giants today got shunned because he decided to go to Carolina, take on the chore of resuscitating the Panthers organization. The Giants were given a chance to match, never actually interviewed him, and he ended up passing because the money and the years was just more in Carolina. So the Giants turned around and hired Jod Judge as their head coach. Who? Right? If Jod Judge signed on and had a press conference and had a bozo clown nose, and that was kind of his shtick, you would go, okay. If Jod Judge had 3 ears, you'd go, okay. Jod Judge was sitting next to me, you wouldn't know. Now, Jod Judge, meteoric rise. He's got some Saban, who he worked for. He's got some Belichick with the wide receiving core. What's amazing about him coming over from the wide receiving core of the New England Patriots is, wasn't that the worst part of the Patriots? Right? I mean, there is a little bit of, you go in, you're like, man, I love this house. I feel like whoever painted didn't do a great job. So then all of a sudden you go down the street and you're like, hey, there's a guy who's building a house. Like, I'm using a guy who built that guy's house down the street you looked at. Really? Who is it? Well, he only did one part of the job, the paint. You're like, what? But some of your ability as a wide receiving coach is you got to have some swag. Remember, you're dealing with a multitude of personalities. From the corporate nature of Benjamin Watson, who could run for senator someday, to the kind of grindy, old school grittiness, toughness, respected, Julian Edelman, to the flamboyant Antonio Brown and Josh Gordon, who they've had. You got to deal with a bunch of different kinds of dudes. And that's what being a head coach is, dealing with a bunch of personalities. It's not always about X and O's. But they did go and get a who. Now, I told you a year before Brian Flores was hired, back when he was, I think the special teams coach, an assistant, like a linebackers coach, that I had NFL people say Brian Flores is going to be a head coach within a year. And sure enough, he's a head coach and a good one with the Dolphins. Some guys you just know. You just know. But Jod Judge, oof. So what's this about? How do you hire a Jod Judge with the New York Giants? The Giants are the biggest football team in the Big Apple. The Giants are the second biggest sports franchise in terms of popularity in the Big Apple. It would potentially be third if the Knicks ever got it going. But you have Yankees 1, Giants 2, Knicks 3. I would say then you go to the Jets, then to the Mets, then to the Rangers, then to the Nets. In about that order. And then the Islanders. How could this possibly be? How could you be the New York Football Giants, who 2 years ago, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong, 2 years ago, it's Doug Gottlieb Show, Fox Sports Radio, 2 years ago, when they were drafting in the top 5, do you remember when everyone said about the Giants drafting in the top 5? You should take a quarterback because the Giants are never in the top 5. Now here we are in the third year where the Giants are drafting inside the top 10, and you start to realize, man, this thing was in need of a complete redo. But I would say the answer is really as simple as you think it is. Jobs are not necessarily about anything other than who you're working for, right? Management makes a huge difference. Cowherd says this all the time, and he's right. Like, my bosses here, just good dudes, easy to work with. Tell them something, be upfront. You got an issue, go, hey, here's what happened. I'm like, all right, because they've seen it all, they've done it all, and they have the respect of their bosses. It's not that Dave Gettleman is a terrible general manager. No, look, he's had to plug a bunch of leaks. He's had to do what Jerry Reese was unable to do. Rebuild the offensive line, get a star running back, and get a quarterback of the future. I still would have taken Sam Darnold, but it's not like Saquon Barkley stinks. And, with the exception of the fumbles, Danny Dimes was way better than anyone could have thought. And based upon how Dwayne Haskins played, it appears like they didn't make the worst pick of all time. But between not being able to pick your own GM, between some fairly obvious limitations at the quarterback, and Dave Gettleman's bizarre press conferences, like last week when he said, we hired 4 computer folks. That's how he describes his analytics department. It ain't like the best and the brightest of the NFL are like, dude, get out of my way. I want to be a coach of the Giants. Now, yesterday, Mike McCarthy was met with a yawn, but I told you, McCarthy was one of the few guys with a resume who's willing to take orders from Jerry Jones, which includes keeping the offensive coordinator. I told you why Cleveland fired their general manager. It wasn't just because of the decisions he made, head coach, coordinator, and quarterback. It was because there's a limited pool of guys who wanted to work for him. And if you wanted to go deep into who wanted to work for him, it would have been a Jod Judge, somebody with no power, somebody with no pull. I think people are missing just how respected the Bills' turnaround is. The Bills hired Sean McDermott, who's the defensive coordinator with the Carolina Panthers. He, in turn, went and hired one of his boys to be the general manager. And the Bills have been in the playoffs 2 of the last 3 years with marginal at best quarterback play. That's what everyone wants. Get to the playoffs. Get competitive. Work together. And if you're not going to fire your general manager, and he's a guy who, like, what are his connections? Pretty obvious that Gettleman didn't have a good relationship with Ron Rivera. Ron Rivera wanted to do his own thing. That's why Rivera took on an inferior roster with a complicated relationship with its owner because Ron Rivera is going to get to pick his general manager. So this is what keeping Dave Gettleman limits you to. It doesn't mean that Jod Judge won't work. It doesn't mean that it's the worst hire of all time because, in truth, you don't know, and neither do I. America would lead you to believe that how can Eric Bieniemy not get the job? He's the offensive coordinator, but he's not. He's really just he's a running backs coach. And to people who have actually done research, he's not seen as a leader of men. Like Eric Bieniemy is the same guy he was as a fiery running back out of Colorado, played in the NFL. A guy who runs hot and cold with people. Pat Mahomes was great with or without Eric Bieniemy. And so, too, is Andy Reid. Doesn't mean he can't be a head coach, but there's a bit of a reputation that's established. And there's not a ton of people coming out of the woodwork saying, inside the NFL, saying, Eric Bieniemy. What's amazing about it was Jason Garrett earlier in the day was rumored to be on his way to New York to interview with the Giants, and that was met with laughs and jokes and chuckles. Jason Garrett has a tremendous resume in comparison to anybody out in the market, especially Jod Judge. But with that resume comes the fact that the Giants have seen the Cowboys for years, and there's a certain of, really, we're going to take a guy who couldn't coach the Cowboys to be the coach of the Giants? Well, what's your choice now? So here's the summation. It's really hard to find a really good NFL coach. It just is. I mean, Nick Saban's as good a college coach as there has ever been. He failed in the NFL. Steve Spurrier, he failed in the NFL. I could go through a laundry list. So the idea that you're going to hire somebody out of college and that's going to work, you don't know. It's almost impossible to steal a coach in the NFL. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers did it and got John Gruden, who won them a Super Bowl. But those guys are few and far between, and they have to be extremely unhappy, and the owner has to be motivated to allow them out or to make a trade. And so your pool of candidates is already shrinking, far more so than any fan would lead you to believe. Then you combined it with the fact that you're keeping your general manager, it shrinks your pool even more. The moment they made the decision to keep Dave Gettleman, you eliminated the possibility of Josh McDaniels, Bill Belichick, or Matt Rule, or of Ron Rivera. That's what it does. It doesn't mean that you're not going to pick a good coach. It just means it shrinks your possibilities. Here's one last parallel. It's, when you're my kids and my daughters are entering high school next year. Like, does a C in their first semester mean they won't go to college? No. But a C in their first semester probably takes Harvard off the list. I mean, look, they're my kids. Harvard's probably off the list anyway. I mean, let's just got to be honest, right? I mean, they're kind of JC kids anyway. But it shrinks your pool. So I don't know if Dave Gettleman did a terrible job. I know that in the NFL, who nobody cares you win a press conference. Don't care. But there's a reason behind it. And those reasons are now stated. Hey, what up? Doug Gottlieb here. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel here at Fox Sports Radio. You can catch my show, all the shows on Fox Sports Radio, unique interviews, strong takes, just interesting discussion on the sports topic of the day, of the week, of the month. It's all encompassing. It's everything you need right here on YouTube. Subscribe.